A soldier returned from a long war, and the bull, which hadn't seen him in years, recognized him instantly. What happens next will leave you speechless. The bull's roar split the silence of the night. Ethan froze mid-step, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil as the sound rolled across the darkened fields. The fences ahead stood like crooked ribs, long neglected, their wood splintered and gray. Beyond them, the massive shadow moved, heavy hooves striking the ground with thunderous weight. Then, under the thin wash of moonlight, the figure became clear. A black bull, broad-shouldered and scarred, its muscles rippling like coiled steel beneath its hide. Its eyes caught the moonlight, burning with an almost human intensity, ironclad. Ethan's chest tightened as though the years collapsed in an instant. He hadn't seen the animal since before the war, before the fire that swallowed the rodeo grounds whole. The world he had once known, the young man working with this bull, dreaming of bigger arenas, felt so far away it was nearly a dream. Yet here the creature stood, alive, powerful, unchanged in body, but not in spirit. The bull lowered its head, nostrils flaring. A snort burst from its lungs, misting in the cold night air. Then it stomped, the impact rattling the brittle wood of the corral. The noise echoed like the crack of a rifle, and Ethan's instincts, sharpened by combat, made his body tense as though preparing for incoming fire. But this wasn't a battlefield overseas. This was home. This was Millhaven. And the danger here was different. The bull charged. The ground shook beneath Ethan's boots as the massive animal barreled toward the fence, its horns gleaming like polished stone. Ethan's breath caught, but he stood his ground, every muscle locked. The bull thundered closer, closer, then skidded to a halt at the edge of the fence, the force of its body shuddering the posts but not breaking them. Dust rose in the air, filling Ethan's lungs with the acrid scent of earth and age. Ironclad didn't retreat. Instead, the beast lifted its massive head and stared at him. Not a casual glance, not the wild, vacant look of an animal acting on instinct, but a sharp, piercing recognition that froze Ethan in place. The bull's eyes, deep and dark, seemed to hold something more than fury. Something remembered. Ethan's hand twitched at his side. His mind flashed to the nights he had spent years ago in these very grounds, whispering calm into Ironclad's ear as they prepared for the arena. He remembered the night of the fire, the screaming crowd, the panic of beasts and men alike, and the last moment he had seen the bull, eyes wide, chained and helpless as smoke devoured the stables. Ethan had thought Ironclad lost forever. Yet here he was. And here Ethan stood, a soldier now, carrying scars that ran deeper than flesh. For a long moment, the two locked eyes. The world around them seemed to vanish. The wind hissed through the broken boards, crickets droned in the distance, and the night air carried the faint scent of hay long rotted away. But neither man nor beast moved. Ethan swallowed hard. "You remember me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. His lips barely moved, but the words slipped into the night as if meant only for the animal before him. Ironclad stamped once, the sound sharp and decisive. His ears flicked forward, his heavy frame still but not tense, as though he were waiting. Ethan stepped closer to the fence, slow and deliberate, his boots crunching softly in the grass. Every instinct screamed at him to keep his distance, to remember that this was still a wild animal. But another instinct, one buried deep in his chest, told him otherwise. This was no coincidence. The bull hadn't just recognized him, it had chosen him. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, his hand hovering just over the top rail of the fence. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded in his ears like the drums of war. Ironclad did not charge again. He snorted, shook his massive head and pawed the ground, but his gaze never wavered. Ethan lowered his hand, pulling back before contact could be made. The connection was already there, invisible but undeniable, and it rattled him more than the roar of enemy gunfire ever had. Behind him, the quiet crunch of footsteps broke the moment. Ethan spun, his body moving with the sharpness of training that had become second nature. A figure emerged from the shadows. His father, Graham Rourke, tall and broad but aged by grief and years of farm work. His lined face was half lit by the lantern he carried, its glow trembling with every gust of wind. "You shouldn't be out here this late," Graham said, his tone firm but heavy. His eyes flicked to the bull, then back to his son. "Not after the fire. That animal's not safe." Ethan's throat was dry. "He knows me." Graham's brow furrowed. He raised the lantern higher, casting light on Ethan's face, searching it. "Ethan, a bull doesn't know a man. It remembers pain, maybe, or fear, but not a man." Ethan glanced back at Ironclad, who still stood, silent and unflinching, as if listening to every word. "Then explain this." The silence that followed was heavier than words. But Graham wasn't wrong. Millhaven was not the town Ethan had left behind. It had the same buildings, the same dusty streets, the same worn faces, But beneath it all, currents of tension moved. Whispers about ownership of land, debts unpaid, and men who ruled not by law but by intimidation. Ethan hadn't been back a full day, but already he could sense it, the same way he had sensed ambushes overseas. One name floated above them all: Rowan Vexler. Rowan owned half the land on the southern edge of town, built on deals that were whispered about but never spoken aloud. He was ruthless with his men, feared by those who crossed him, and always hungry for more. And now, Ethan realized with a sinking certainty, Rowan's gaze had turned toward the abandoned rodeo grounds. The bull snorted again, stamping the earth hard enough to shake the fence. The sound echoed in Ethan's chest like a warning drum. He drew in a long breath, steadying himself, and looked at his father. "Rowan's not going to leave him alone," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. Graham's jaw tightened. "Rowan doesn't leave anything alone. He takes, always has." The lantern's flame flickered, shadows stretching across the fence line, bending and twisting over the bull's massive form. Ethan stared into Ironclad's dark eyes one last time, and for the first time since coming home, he felt something stirred deep within him. Not just recognition, but responsibility. The bull had survived the fire. He had waited here, years alone, unbroken. And now, of all men in Millhaven, he had recognized Ethan. That was no accident. Ethan stepped back, his voice low but steady. "If Rowan comes for him, he'll have to go through me." The bull lifted its head, its gaze locked on him still. For an instant, it was as if man and beast shared the same thought, the same unspoken oath. Ethan didn't move until the moment broke, until the bull finally turned away and vanished into the dark of the ruined arena. Only then did he exhale, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Millhaven was not as quiet as it seemed. Rowan Vexler, a local rancher with a reputation for cruelty, had been scheming to take over the old rodeo grounds. He saw Ironclad as a beast worth breaking, or destroying, to show his power. Ethan, still unsure of his place in town, soon found himself standing between a man who wanted dominance and a bull that recognized him instantly, as if waiting for something only Ethan could understand. The first sound Ethan heard was the panicked bellow of the bull. He shot upright from his bed, heart hammering as the distant crash of splintering wood echoed across the fields. The night air was thick and still, but in that silence came a chorus of noises: the stomp of hooves, the shouts of men, the metallic clatter of chains. He didn't need to wonder who it was. Rowan Vexler's men had finally come for Ironclad. Ethan grabbed the lantern by his door but left it unlit. Darkness would serve him better. He shoved his boots on, pulled his coat tight, and sprinted into the night, his breath clouding in the cold. The farmhouse behind him stayed still. His father did not stir. Ethan didn't want him to. This was his burden. The rodeo grounds loomed like a broken skeleton in the moonlight. The old arena fences were half-rotted, but they had stood long enough to cage a legend. Shadows moved among the posts, 3, maybe 4 men, wrestling with ropes and poles as they tried to hem Ironclad in. The bull thundered back and forth, his massive body colliding with wood, kicking dirt, every charge scattering Rowan's men like dry leaves. Ethan crouched low behind a collapsed fence rail, his eyes narrowing. He saw their weapons glint, pistols holstered, but clubs and iron hooks raised. His jaw tightened. Rowan hadn't sent them to handle Ironclad. He had sent them to beat him down. "Hold him! Rope the legs!" One of the ranch hands barked, his voice cracking with panic. Ethan's breath slowed, the old rhythm returning, the heartbeat of a soldier preparing to move. He scanned the arena. 3 men were inside the corral, another at the gate, holding a length of chain. They had the numbers, but they didn't have the discipline. Their formation was sloppy, their movements loud and clumsy. They didn't understand the animal they were facing. But Ethan did. He slipped silently along the edge of the fence, keeping low, his hands brushing the ground as if feeling the earth itself for guidance. Ironclad bellowed again, his horns catching the moonlight as he swung his head, scattering 2 men who had come too close. The third man lunged with a rope, but the bull snapped sideways, sending him sprawling face first into the dirt. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight them openly, not here, not with his father's farm 1 field away. If shots were fired, if Rowan could twist the story, the blame would fall squarely on him. No, this had to be handled with precision, with silence. He reached the gate first. The man there didn't notice him until Ethan's hand clamped down on his wrist. In a fluid motion, Ethan twisted the joint and shoved the man into the fence post, the breath rushing out of him with a dull grunt. Ethan snatched the chain from his hand and hurled it into the weeds. The man slumped, dazed but alive. The commotion drew the eyes of the others, but Ethan ducked low, vanishing into shadow. He picked up a loose rock and tossed it hard against the far side of the fence. The sharp crack split the night, and Ironclad spun toward the sound. The bull surged, massive hooves tearing into the dirt, and plowed straight into the two men who had been moving to circle him. They scrambled back, one of them losing his grip on the rope. "Where is he?" one shouted, scanning the dark. Ethan slipped behind him, his steps light but sure. With a swift kick to the back of the man's knee, Ethan sent him sprawling. Before the ranch hand could cry out, Ethan clamped a hand over his mouth. "Stay down," he growled in a low whisper, the kind that carried no anger but a soldier's absolute command. The man froze, his chest heaving, and then went still. Ironclad turned again, his eyes locking briefly with Ethan's. The bull's chest heaved, sides glistening with sweat in the pale light. Ethan raised his hand, palm open. No words, no whistle, just the signal they had shared years ago. To Ethan's shock, Ironclad stilled, his stamping easing into tense silence, as though awaiting direction. The last man standing spotted Ethan and snarled, You're the one keeping this beast alive!" He raised his club and charged. Ethan shifted his weight, stepping sideways at the last second. The man barreled past, colliding headlong with the fence. The old wood cracked and buckled, sending shards flying. Before the man could turn, Ethan grabbed his collar and yanked him backward, sweeping his legs from under him. The ranch hand hit the dirt with a grunt. His sudden collapse of his men left the corral in chaos. Ironclad stamped, snorted, and bellowed once more, his massive body circling the arena. Ethan stood in the center, shoulders squared, chest heaving, as the dust settled around them. For an instant, it was as though man and beast were the only two beings left in the world. Then, from the shadows at the edge of the field, a slow clap broke the silence. Rowan Vexler stepped into the moonlight. His tall frame cut a sharp silhouette, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face, but his smile gleamed like a blade. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Ethan. "Well," Rowan drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "Seems the war didn't dull you after all. I was curious to see what made this animal bend. Now I know. It isn't the bull that's different. It's you." Ethan's fists tightened at his sides. "Ironclad doesn't bend," he said, his voice steady. "Not to you. Not to anyone." Rowan's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "We'll see about that. Men can be broken. Beasts can be broken. And when I'm done, the two of you will kneel the same." Ironclad snorted, pawing the ground, his eyes fixed on Rowan with a rage that mirrored Ethan's own. The bull stepped forward, horns low, and Rowan's smirk faltered for just an instant before returning sharper than before. "You can't stand in the way forever, soldier," Rowan said, his tone shifting from mockery to threat. "I'll take him, and when I do, I'll make sure the whole town watches as I break him down piece by piece." Ethan's jaw clenched. He could feel Ironclad's presence beside him, like a storm held barely in check. "You'll never touch him," he said, each word measured, deliberate. Rowan chuckled darkly, backing into the shadows where his men lay groaning. "We'll see. Pride is a stubborn thing, but so is mine." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark, leaving behind only the ragged breath of his men and the steady thunder of Ironclad's hooves. Ethan stood in the center of the ruined corral, chest rising and falling with controlled force. The night air pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating, but his mind was sharper than it had been since the war. He had not sought this fight, but it had come to him nonetheless. He turned to Ironclad, the bull's massive frame still taut with tension. For a moment, Ethan thought of the battlefield, the chaos, the smoke, the endless noise. Yet here, in the quiet of Millhaven, with a bull at his side and enemies in the shadows, he felt the same unrelenting truth. War had found him again. And this time, it wasn't a war fought with rifles or grenades. It was one fought with willpower, strategy, and trust. Ironclad stomped once, his eyes steady on Ethan, almost as if acknowledging the unspoken vow between them. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands loosening at his sides. "Looks like it's just you and me now," he whispered. The bull let out a low, rumbling snort, and Ethan felt the strange certainty deepen within him. This bond was more than chance, more than memory. It was something unshakable. As the night faded toward dawn, Ethan left the arena with Ironclad still pacing the fence line. He knew Rowan would return. He knew the fight had only begun, and he knew the cost of standing between a man like Rowan and the beast he sought would be steep. Ethan returned home shaken but aware of something powerful. He was no longer just a soldier returning to find peace. He had stepped into a new battle, one rooted not in foreign soil but in his own backyard. The bull had chosen him, but the cost of that choice would soon prove higher than he imagined. The roar of the crowd swelled as Rowan Vexler stepped into the center of the old fairgrounds, his voice booming over the restless chatter. "Today," he declared, sweeping off his hat with a flourish, "Millhaven will witness the greatest spectacle this town has ever seen. A contest of man against beast, strength against fury. His words rolled through the air, pulling cheers and whistles from some, murmurs of uncertainty from others. Families pressed close to the splintered rails of the arena, children perched on shoulders, men with folded arms, women clutching shawls tighter against the rising wind. The wooden bleachers creaked under the weight of townsfolk eager for distraction, unaware, or unwilling to admit, that cruelty lingered beneath the promise of entertainment. At the far end of the ring, Ironclad was dragged forward in chains. The bull's massive form heaved against the restraints, muscles rippling, eyes wild with fury. The iron bit into his hide, leaving raw marks that oozed faint streaks of blood. Rowan's men shouted and jeered, jerking the chains tighter each time the bull lunged, laughing as if pain were part of the performance. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, his coat pulled tight, jaw rigid. Every shout from Rowan's men pressed against his chest like a weight. He had known this was a trap from the moment Rowan announced the event. Rowan never staged anything without cruelty at its heart. But to stay away had been impossible. Not when Ironclad was at the center of it. Rowan raised his hands, letting the cheers subside. His grin cut like a blade as he turned in a slow circle, soaking in the attention. This beast has haunted Millhaven for years, untamable, dangerous. Tonight, he will face challengers brave enough to prove themselves. And when the dust settles, you'll see that no creature can stand against true will. The words struck Ethan like sparks to dry grass. Rowan wasn't simply trying to control Ironclad. He wanted to break him in front of every soul in town, to turn strength into a spectacle of dominance. The gate creaked. The chains loosened. Ironclad stumbled forward, his chest rising in great shuddering heaves, snorts bursting like thunder from his nostrils. The men released him into the ring, but not gently. They shoved him with poles and hooks, goading him into rage. The crowd gasped as the bull staggered, then roared as he righted himself, the sound of his hooves striking earth like war drums. But when Ironclad lifted his head, his fury was not for the men around him. His dark eyes fixed on Rowan. Ethan's pulse spiked. He knew the look. It was not wild confusion. It was intent. The bull charged. The chains snapped like brittle twine, links scattering across the arena as though they had been nothing more than straw. Rowan's confident stance faltered, his grin freezing into shock. The crowd shrieked, some leaping from the bleachers, others clinging tighter to the rails. Rowan's men scrambled, waving poles, but they were nothing to Ironclad's momentum. The bull plowed past, dust spraying high, horns low, eyes locked on the man who had taunted him. Ethan didn't think. He moved. Vaulting the rail, he dropped into the ring, the world collapsing into the thunder of hooves and the pounding of his heart. His boots struck dirt, and instinct took over. He raised his arm, palm open, and shouted, his voice carrying across the chaos. "Ironclad, easy, with me!" The bull's head snapped toward him. For a heartbeat, time slowed. The storm paused, waiting. Ethan gestured sharply, stepping sideways, signaling the way he had once guided the animal years before. Ironclad obeyed, his charge veering, skimming past Rowan by a hair's breadth. Dust swirled around them in a choking cloud as the crowd roared anew. "Control him!" someone shouted from the bleachers. "He'll kill us all!" But Ethan knew better. Ironclad wasn't mindless. His fury had focus, and that focus could be turned. "Here, this way!" Ethan commanded, his voice firm, cutting through the noise. He pivoted, gesturing again. The bull followed, circling wide, his rage redirected from the fleeing townsfolk to the man who had tried to chain him. Rowan stumbled backward, his face pale beneath his brim. "Stay back!" he snarled, fumbling at his side. From the folds of his coat he drew a blade, its edge catching the sunlight in a sharp flash. His hand trembled, though his sneer remained. "You think you've tamed him, soldier?" Rowan spat, his voice laced with venom. "Then let's see if your beast can bleed." Ethan's gut clenched. The crowd gasped, some calling for Rowan to stop, others frozen in rapt silence. "Ironclad, hold!" Ethan shouted, thrusting his palm upward. The bull stamped, snorting, circling the two men in the dust. Ethan's eyes locked with Rowan's, his own fury rising to meet the threat. Rowan lunged. Ethan intercepted, their bodies colliding in a violent clash. The blade slashed, grazing Ethan's sleeve, tearing cloth but sparing flesh. He grappled Rowan's wrist, forcing the weapon down, their boots digging trenches into the dirt. The crowd cried out, the spectacle shifting from man against beast to man against man. "You'll destroy him for pride?" Ethan growled through clenched teeth, shoving Rowan back. Rowan's face twisted. "I'll destroy him because he dares to defy me, just like you." The struggle churned dust around them, Ironclad circling, his great hooves pounding the ground like a drumbeat of judgment. The bull's sides heaved, his breath hot in the air, but he waited, watching, as though choosing his moment. Ethan wrenched Rowan's wrist, the blade tumbling to the dirt. Rowan roared in frustration, swinging wildly, landing a blow across Ethan's jaw that sent stars bursting behind his eyes. But Ethan held firm, forcing Rowan back step by step. Then Ironclad moved. With a bellow that shook the earth, the bull lunged, his massive horned head slamming into Rowan's side. The impact sent Rowan sprawling across the dirt, his scream tearing through the air as his leg crumpled beneath the weight. The crowd recoiled, gasps breaking into horrified silence. Rowan writhed, clutching his shattered leg, his face pale with agony. Ironclad towered above him, snorting, stamping, ready to strike again. The crowd watched, breathless, as justice loomed over cruelty. But Ethan stepped forward, raising his hand once more. His voice cut through the silence, steady and commanding. "Ironclad, back!" The bull froze, his massive chest heaving, his eyes still burning with rage. Slowly, as if recognizing the weight of Ethan's words, he withdrew, circling back to stand at Ethan's side. The arena erupted, not with cheers, not with jeers, but with stunned silence that swelled into scattered cries of awe. The townsfolk had seen it with their own eyes. Not fear, not dominance, but trust. Ethan stood tall, sweat streaming down his face, dust clinging to his coat. Ironclad's shadow loomed beside him, unbroken, untamed, yet bound to him by something stronger than chains. Rowan lay broken in the dirt, his pride shattered more than his body, yet Ethan's gaze never wavered. He had chosen restraint, showing that power was not in destruction, but in control. And though the crowd now knew the truth, Ethan's heart carried a heavier certainty. This was not the end. Rowan's pride still smoldered, and fire like that never died quietly. The people of Millhaven saw the truth with their own eyes. Rowan's cruelty was broken, and Ethan's bond with the bull was something undeniable. Yet the victory was not clean. Ethan knew Rowan would not stop, not while his pride still smoldered. The news of Rowan's defeat spread through Millhaven before the dust had even settled in the arena. Men who had once followed him out of fear now looked the other way when he limped down the main street. His swagger was gone, replaced by a stooped frame and a cane he barely managed to keep steady. The same people who used to whisper of his power now laughed in corners, retelling the moment when a soldier and a bull had crushed him in front of the entire town. His name, once spoken with caution, had become a punchline. Ethan saw none of this as triumph. Standing by the rebuilt fence line of the rodeo grounds a week later, he stared at the broad fields, the wooden posts that now gleamed with fresh paint, and the townsfolk hammering boards into place. The air was filled with the rhythm of hammers and the murmur of men working together. Yet for Ethan, the sound carried weight. He had known victories before, but they had always left scars. War had taught him that. Ironclad stood not far from him, a towering presence at the edge of the pasture. The bull's dark eyes locked onto Ethan with a quiet intensity. He would lower his massive head, paw the dirt once, then remain still, as though waiting. The bond between man and beast was unspoken but undeniable. The mayor approached from behind, brushing sawdust from his jacket. He was a stout man with lines etched deep in Ethan, turned slowly, his expression unreadable. His hands, scarred and rough, gripped the fence post. "I didn't come back here to lead anyone," he said quietly. His voice carried the low weight of memory, of battles that refused to leave his mind. "I came back to find some peace." The mayor studied him, nodding as though he expected the resistance. "Peace doesn't come by hiding. Sometimes it comes by standing where people need you. Think about it." He left Ethan with those words, walking back to the workers without pressing further. That night, Ethan sat outside his small cabin on the outskirts of town. The field stretched before him, moonlight brushing across the tall grass. Ironclad appeared again at the fence line, silent, immovable. Ethan found himself speaking aloud, though only the bull was there to hear. To his face, the kind of man who had seen too many arguments and not enough solutions. "Ethan," the mayor began, his tone both hopeful and cautious, "the people trust you. They've seen what you did. This place, it can be something again. Not a pit for cruelty, but a place of pride. We need someone to lead it, someone they believe in. That someone is you." "They want me to be something I'm not," he muttered. "A leader, a symbol. But I've been that before, and all it left me was scars." His gaze lingered on the beast. Ironclad's ear twitched, and for a moment, Ethan felt as if the animal understood. Yet, maybe scars are what people trust. Maybe they need to see someone who's lived through the fire. The following weeks proved the mayor right. People came to Ethan with questions. Farmers asking for advice on rebuilding their barns, boys wanting to learn how to ride properly, and even elders who simply wanted his opinion. Children followed him at a distance, whispering about the man who had tamed the bull. Though Ethan never claimed the role, it seemed the town had already decided. But Rowan had not disappeared. Stripped of power, he staggered through Millhaven like a shadow of himself. His debts were uncovered by county investigators, schemes of stolen cattle, underground fights, and false land claims. Each revelation chipped away at his name until there was nothing left but ruin. His men deserted him, unwilling to carry the weight of a sinking ship. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Rowan stood outside the saloon. His once proud hat was gone, his clothes soiled, his hand trembling as he clutched his cane. He watched Ethan walk past on his way to the grounds, the respect in people's nods, the quiet way they stepped aside for him. Rowan's jaw tightened, eyes burning with the humiliation he could not bear. "He took everything," he hissed under his breath, though no one stood near him. "The town, the beast, the place that was mine. If I can't have it, neither will he." That night, while Millhaven slept, Rowan crept to the rodeo grounds. The moon lit the outlines of the new fences, strong and clean, a symbol of renewal. In his hand he carried a lantern and a flask of kerosene. His steps were slow, labored by his injuries, but his eyes carried the madness of a man with nothing left to lose. He poured the liquid along the posts, muttering curses with each splash. His hands shook so badly that the kerosene spilled across his clothes. When the lantern flared, his face twisted with triumph. "Let's see them honor ashes," he growled. But he was not alone. From the darkness came voices, men who had once feared him but now stood united. Farmers, ranchers, and townsfolk stepped from the shadows, their lanterns glowing like watchfires. One man's voice rang out, firm and steady. "Put it down, Rowan." Rowan spun, his cane nearly slipping. "You dare stop me?" he snarled. "You were nothing without me. You cowered at my boots." The farmer stepped closer, his eyes hard. "We cowered because we thought we had no choice. But those days are over." The crowd closed in, surrounding Rowan. Panic flickered in his eyes as he realized the balance had shifted. For the first time, he was the one trapped. The lantern slipped from his grasp and shattered, flames licking at the kerosene-soaked earth. Gasps rippled through the men as fire rushed along the fence line. Rowan staggered back, but before he could escape, two townsfolk seized him by the arms. He fought weakly, his body too broken to resist. Ethan arrived moments later, drawn by the shouts and the glow of fire. He saw the flames racing, the men dousing them with buckets of water, and Rowan thrashing in the grip of those who had once served him. Ethan stepped forward, his face calm but resolute. Rowan's eyes locked onto him, filled with venom and desperation. "This was mine," he cried hoarsely. "You think they'll follow you? You're nothing but a soldier chasing ghosts." Ethan's voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. "No, Rowan, I'm a man who came home, and this town doesn't belong to you anymore." The last flames were stamped out, leaving smoke curling in the night air. Rowan sagged in defeat as the townsfolk dragged him toward the waiting sheriff. Not a single voice rose in his defense. Ethan stood by the blackened fence, the wood scarred but still standing. Ironclad appeared from the field, drawn to the commotion, his dark form looming against the firelit horizon. The bull's presence was steady, grounding, as if to remind Ethan of the bond forged in the arena. As Rowan was taken away, Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight on his chest easing for the first time since his return. The war he had been fighting, against Rowan, against his own doubts, was finally over. He looked at Ironclad, the beast who had met him not with fury but with recognition, as though the bull had known from the start what Ethan had yet to accept. The soldier who had returned uncertain of his place had found not only a purpose, but also a strange ally in a bull that had recognized him instantly, as though it had known all along that Ethan's battles were not yet done. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of loyalty, profound animal intelligence, and the enduring power of bonds forged by shared experience. This narrative aims to highlight the deep emotional connections that can exist between humans and animals, and to celebrate the love that transcends time and distance.